In the darkest nights, we find our light. Battered souls, but we won't lose sight. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, we stand tall. United forever. Strength and courage will overcome. Oh, surviving together, victorious, never, never alone. Hand in hand, we'll face the unknown.
We see you, we hear you, and we believe you. Hey, 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 everyone. How you doing today? I hope everyone can hear me. I hope everyone can see me. We should be good. You have landed at Surviving Together. If you did not know, safe space for sexual assault and other trauma survivors to connect with one another and on our healing journey. It's also a place where we have trauma-related education for all. So let's see who we have here tonight. We have Crystal M joining us. Thank you. I am so glad that you are here. I think that this is going to be a great topic tonight. We have Cosmic Connection, Cosmic Kristy Robinson is joining us tonight to talk about autism and trauma. So it should be a great conversation. Let's see who else we have here. Jimena, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I hope you are doing well tonight. Audrey Gore, oh, thank you, thank you. I hope you're having a great evening as well. It's a little late for you guys. And Carmel, thank you for being here as well. I know it's late for you too, and I always appreciate you being here. And I hope you are feeling better. I'm very much interested. Shoot me an email if you can. I'm really interested to see how you're doing. And James Simpson, how are you doing? What is going on for you tonight? Thanks for dropping in. And Indigo Twin, oh, you're going to add to this conversation. I know this is going to be a good one. Thank you for being here. Dave T, love to have you here. I wonder how things are going on the East Coast. It is freezing here. I thought it was supposed to be a lot warmer because we were supposed to have a warm up this week, right? And then Friday, cold. It was so cold today. We had like 50-mile-an-hour winds, which just made it very cold. Hey, Todd, how you doing? I hope you're feeling okay. I hope you're doing a little bit better than you were last time. Healing up. Let's see. Happy birthday, Dave T. Oh my gosh, didn't know it was your birthday. Happy birthday, Dave. So glad that you are joining us on your special day. Hi, Kim, how are you doing? 90% sleeping but listening. Hey, then no problem. There's always replay too, so don't worry about it. I'm really glad to have you here tonight. Let's see. The Audrey, just seeing a Stitches coming out tomorrow. Okay, let's, hey, that's progress, right? Hi, Don, how you doing? Listen at work. That sounds wonderful. Glad to have you with us. Okay, so we have gotten everyone who is in chat so far. All right, so we have got a wonderful live for you guys tonight. We are going to be starting a conversation about trauma and autism. I will admit this is absolutely an area I did not know a whole lot about in regards to autism. Trauma, yes. Autism, no. So we're going to be talking tonight about the differences between the two and the similarities, where do they overlap? And then kind of what happens when you have both and the struggles that brings about and the, different coping mechanisms that you have to do when you have both combined. So, and then we're also going to talk about a little bit more about trauma and how trauma affects somebody with autism. And I'm not going to be getting into a lot of scientific numbers, mainly because when I was doing my research for this, things about it are kind of all over the board. And it seems that this is a newer avenue of research that they're doing about trauma in people with autism. So, with that, we are going to bring on our very own Cosmic Kristy here onto the screen. How are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome.
Okay. Just checking. Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about
Little bit
anything.
anxious.
Yep,
Okay,
no,
cool.
we're gonna go through this kind of just like we did beforehand. And sorry, I'm just reading the Indigo. I know you're going to have a lot to add on to this tonight, and it's especially with the autism um, aspect of it. This is something that's very new to me, and it's been really interesting talking to Kristy behind the scenes and just kind of the research that I had to do to kind of get myself up to speed in regards to this. But before we dive into all of that, Kristy, as we talked, can you give just kind of a brief history of yourself and just, I know that you've suffered traumas, different traumas throughout your life, right? You've had some
Yeah,
traumas as
sure,
a child, and then kind of how this whole autism thing for you came to light later on.
sure. I was born from intense trauma. My father is a pedophile. My mother was his victim. And then I suffered as a victim of my father's narcissism throughout my life. He was what I would call probably a malignant narcissist. Very charismatic,
Mm-hmm.
but a liar. And then my mother she abandoned me to my father um, over and over again. And then, yeah, and then she came back into my life, and I had a stepfather, and she, she, she was his abuser, and he ended up. This is You might activate some people's triggers. She ended up, you know, abusing him to the point where he took his own life, and so I've taken that into taken up a project, and I've started a project to help men raise their voices
Awesome.
about domestic violence.
Right. So
Yeah,
you've
so
seen it
that's what
from
I've
both
done.
yeah, so you've seen it from both avenues
Yeah,
with men and
so
women.
so that's where I can see it. I feel like I've seen it from both sides, so I've got a balanced perspective.
Mm-hmm. Right.
um, so, and that's where trauma has touched my life. It hasn't stopped touching my life, basically.
Right.
It just seems to continue. But in but because of that, and because of my because I've got autism and my want for knowledge, I've
Mm-hmm.
always sought help. I've
Mm-hmm.
sought help and therapy, and I've wanted to be better. I haven't
Right.
wanted to be like my parents. I've wanted to be the complete opposite of my parents. I've always sought help. Um, One of the reasons why I'm so good at talking about this is because um, I've sought therapy throughout time and taken on what works and what doesn't. And a lot of it hasn't worked because
Mm-hmm.
obviously, well, you know, I'm only my second day into recovery again.
Hey,
um, you know, but
proud of you.
um, thank you.
Very proud of you.
um, but helping other people helps me. It's like an Ouroboros of care.
Mm-hmm.
So If I sit around and just think about myself, I can't do that. But
Yeah.
the only reason I found out about that I had autism is that I went through incredible trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and it seemed to exacerbate my autistic traits because I was trying to hide something so big. Because I
Mm-hmm.
was very loud about what my dad did to my mum, because I was such a young child when I found out about it. Because I read up about stuff, and I was like looking around at all these adults that let this terrible thing happen to my mother. I was like, why do you let this happen? And I was like,
Right.
I was very loud about it,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been loud about it for a very long time. And now I'm being loud about what my mother did to my stepfather. And I can't be loud about what's happened to me. I have to be quiet about it until the legal process has
Mm-hmm.
played out. So I have to be
Right.
quiet about that. But I'm going to be loud about my recovery process in
Mm-hmm.
case it helps somebody else.
Absolutely.
Um, but but anyway, back to the autism. That's what we're here for. Keep me on
No,
track.
you're doing great. You are. I would have interrupted you, but no, you're doing
Uh,
great.
yeah.
So,
So,
so the
but
trauma was exacerbating your
yeah,
artistic traits.
because I was putting on such a mask to hide this terrible secret that all
Mm-hmm.
my autistic masks were falling away.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was starting to have meltdowns at the people I love, and I was, you know, it was affecting my relationships and all that sort of stuff. So it was actually starting to disable me when before I
Mm-hmm.
had all these coping mechanisms and I managed to get through.
Mm-hmm.
When that's what a lot of women, that's why it doesn't seem to come through for a lot of women until later on in life because they manage.
Yeah.
It's not like they're some superstar and they cope better with autism than men. It's just they just manage until later on in life, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
studied, so you just
Mm-hmm.
don't know about it until you know about it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so some people cope with autism. I think I suffered with it my whole life because I was bullied.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people live with it. It's just a matter of how um, how quick you know about it and how it's treated. And early intervention is key.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, so I feel like for me, being diagnosed and finding out that it's not me, it's not in my head, even though it is neurological, so it is in my head. Um, and recently I found out, and this was amazing for me, but it's not intellectual. It's very few people with autism have intellectual disabilities as well, and usually that's caused by something else. It's a
Mm-hmm.
disconnect between the body and mind. It's like
Mm-hmm.
a it's like a motor issue and a sensory issue and a communication issue. It's
Right.
not
Not
intellectual.
an intelligence issue.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
treat everyone who has autism as if they're the same as you. Talk to them the same. Don't talk
Mm-hmm.
to them like they're not there. Don't talk about
Yeah.
them. Talk to them. And that's one of the reasons why I agreed to do this because I'm no expert. I'm just someone with autism, and I can tell you what it's like for me. I can't
Right.
tell you what it's like for somebody else because you talk to one person with autism, you're talking to one person with autism,
Right.
and that's I can't even tell you what it's like for my daughter because I'm not in her head, and that was one
Mm-hmm.
of the biggest problems I had when I was talking to all her specialists. I was like, stop talking to me, talk to her. She's right
Yeah.
there.
Right.
Ask her. Just because she's finding it difficult to talk to you, there are cues you can pick up, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
able to pick them up and talk to you about them. But she's right there, and she's nodding at you. Just look at her.
Right. Yeah,
You
exactly.
know?
Communicate on her level of whatever she can
Yeah,
give you at that point. And so
exactly.
you said it was only what, 4 years ago or something, three and a
Yeah.
half years ago that you discovered that you got an official autism diagnosis.
Well, I never thought that I was autistic. I just thought that I had issues because I just thought that I got told I had issues, and it was only because my daughter was getting diagnosed and I was going through this thing at the time that
Right.
her therapist recognized that I needed to be diagnosed at the same time. They said, get yourself tested. And
Right.
it was really funny. It's a funny story. That one of the just the emails back and forth between me and the therapist told her that I was autistic because I asked too many questions. Too many questions. Because
Yeah,
I was
interesting.
confused because there's no test specific for me or for women yet. So it was just a child-based test, and I was confused about why I was getting all these tests for children. I was like, why am I getting tests for children? And then I sent her test emails about how do I start the test, and then I was saying how long am I meant to take on the test. And I was asking her all these questions, and then eventually when she gave me my diagnosis, she goes, I knew you were autistic just by the first few emails. You
Oh,
know,
yeah, that's
even
so
if I,
interesting.
yeah, because I asked, I wanted to know, I wanted to know everything. And it's
Right,
always how I've always been. I've always wanted to know everything. And that's not always a sign of autism, but
right.
it's, you know, it can be.
Exactly. And
So,
that's one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, with trauma and autism, like how many things overlap, like, similar type symptoms. I was sharing with you
mm,
beforehand when I got my self-diagnosis mainly, and I found out about CPTSD, that it was a thing. All these markers just kind of fell into place for me, and I went, wow, there's a reason as to why I am the way I am, not just because I had a dad like this or I had a this. It's all this trauma. It's rooted in all this trauma. And then when I was discovering, this community and more people, and was hearing about autism, and I was listening to people, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I do that too. And I do that. And that is, and then so I was wondering myself, I'm like, should I get tested? Am I on the spectrum somewhere? I was so confused. So then to discover something like this and to see, oh, there's this overlap of symptoms, it's just kind of where you're coming from in regards to the symptoms, why it's an issue for you, kind of tells you, is it
yeah,
coming from CPTSD, is it coming from autism? And then it gets incredibly muddied when you've got both, and you're
well,
layering
that's
them on
right.
top of each other.
Well, I knew that I had CPTSD because I had come from such trauma. But
Right.
when I had tested and it was so obvious that I had autism too, it took me a while to actually. I was like, why can I can't keep having all these things. I just
Mm.
can't. You know, I just can't.
Yeah.
I'm like the Ash of Pokemon. I've got to catch them all. You know.
How many more mental conditions can I have? I mean, and that's one
Yeah.
thing we want to make clear right off the bat, is autism is not a mental condition. It's something that
No.
you're born with, and the research, the science behind it, they still haven't quite figured out what happens, or what goes on, but they've pretty much pinpointed that this is stuff that happens in utero. It's not anything that's caused by, later on, things in childhood, or whatever, this is stuff that you're born with, your brain, the chemistry, the pathways. This is how they're wired when you come out. Was
Mm.
that a difficult thing, finding out later on in life that you had autism? And I know it was complicated by all the trauma, but was that a difficult thing for you to accept then, or was it easier because
Uh,
you were dealing with your daughter having it as well, and going, okay, well, yeah, I'm
I
not
was glad
alone.
for I was glad for my daughter that I was as well, because then it was like well, you are and I am too. Then she wasn't alone,
Hmm.
you know, because then
Yeah.
she didn't have to travel that road alone, because there is a bit of a stigma with autism that you get. People
Yeah.
would much rather
Yeah.
be, you know, you find that people would much rather be ADHD than autistic,
Hmm.
um, which is, you know, I'm not bothered by it because when my daughter, I kind of knew she was autistic back when she was in grade 2, but I didn't follow through with that diagnosis because I was like, well, it doesn't really matter because autism it just means that she's going to have she's going to not look people in the eyes, and I can't look people in the eyes, and it didn't actually click to me that I might be a little bit autistic too. I just said that, it's just she's just gonna be a little bit different, and that's fine.
Right.
But for me, ADHD was a problem behavior, so I thought that's where I'm gonna have to go. Now I wish I had the early intervention, so that's on me. But it is what it is. Yeah, I
Right.
didn't
Right.
know. You can't know what you don't know. You know.
Exactly. Exactly. You
You
were
know.
operating with the information that you had at the time.
Well, they didn't know anything about autism in girls at that stage, so I looked it up and there wasn't anything, so I didn't have anything to go by. All I could see was autism in boys.
That's so
So,
fascinating. And I think that two things I just want to mention again, and it's because you brought up the stigma, and it was something that I had always thought of that I did not know about autism. I always thought that there was an intellectual, we always looked at people and said, they're autistic, or, oh no, they've got Asperger's, so they're high functioning autistic. And it always made it sound like it was an intellectual issue, that, that they were slower, that,
it's only
and
really been looked into now that it's not intellectual. It's only really been found out now, and that's another thing we can talk about another time, and.
yeah, it's really, really interesting. Two things I want to just quick mention. Please, if anything is triggering for you guys, your mental health takes precedence. I'm going to leave the trigger warning running throughout this entire time. But if you need to step back, if you need to step away, please do so. Your mental health comes first, and please protect it. I'm just going to briefly say hi to some other people who have come in the chat. Barbie, I'm so glad to have you here tonight. Creating Change, Guy, I'm glad you stopped in. Thank you so much for being here. Patty, thank you. I'm so glad that you're here tonight. How is it going for you? Mustang Mike is here. How are you doing? Hollywood, what's your evening like? How are things going for you? I am so glad that you are here as well. And I think that is it for the new people that pop by. So let's talk just a little bit about excuse me, I've got to get a little more comfortable, guys. I'm trying not to get myself totally off screen, but I've got to get a little more comfortable here. So I can speak to CPTSD, something I know very well, right? And I'm comfortable, talking about trauma. And some of the things that were mentioned in regards to, main differences between autism and CPTSD. Autism, as we've just mentioned, is something that you're born with, and CPTSD is something that you develop or you acquire because of your traumatic experiences that you have, whether it's
One's like Lady Gaga and one's like Maybelline.
yeah, and so CPTSD, it can be from one big instance, or it can be, these little T's traumas that we've talked about. So the constant neglect, constant abuse, constant bullying or racism or things like this, these can all add up and, develop into CPTSD. So the traumatic event is singularly, a main difference between autism and CPTSD. You've got this trauma base, and everything's really going to go back to that trauma. So all these things that I'm going to mention right now are going to be things that, again, we're always going to relate it back to the trauma. So avoidance behaviors, things that we do to avoid triggering ourselves, to avoid reminding ourselves of that trauma. All of those types of things, again, it's going to go back to that trauma. Intrusive memories and flashbacks, again, related to that trauma. and hypervigilance. And this is something that is also present in autistic people. But the hypervigilance that we talk about with CPTSD is mainly in terms of scanning our surroundings, always concerned for our safety, making sure that that traumatic event doesn't happen again, and nightmares. Again, kind of a hallmark of CPTSD. Hey, Echo, how are you doing? So glad to have you. Listen on the treadmill. Best of both worlds. Get your exercise in, girl. Very proud of you if you're doing that. So those are kind of some of the main things with CPTSD. And here in a minute, I'm going to put up a chart when we start talking about the overlap between the two. But some of the hallmarks of autism, at least that from my research, what they, and we had some, I won't say disagreements, but that some of this is individual for autistic people, that not everybody will. But in general speaking, one of the main hallmarks of autism is repetition and routine. So repetitious behaviors and routines, and these are things that soothe yourself as well. They help to be able to manage what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And you're nodding your head, so I can see that this is something that you experience, that you.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got repetitive, can't words, but I
Yeah.
have repetitive behavior.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, so like stimming, like I stim, like this is a stim, or I'll
Yep.
play with my necklaces, or before the live I turned off the camera and I had a little bit of jump around in my room to get out some of my nervous energy.
Mhm.
So it's just there's a whole bunch. Oh, my hands, there's like sometimes I'll watch back my live, which I really hate doing because I hate my voice. But I see all the different things that I do, which I don't
Mhm.
notice that I do until I see myself, because I
Right.
don't watch me, I watch you.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
yeah, so but it's just like yeah, you don't notice what you do until you watch yourself back, but you know or until you sort of, but I didn't know I did this until I found out that I was autistic, and then you find out that these are actually stimming behaviors, which is stimulating,
Mhm.
or they're anti-stimulating. So because you find the world too stimulating, so you do this to bring back the stimulation of the world. So
Mhm.
so I wear these headphones out in the world because the world is too much. So it
And
brings
that's
the sound
another.
down.
Right, and that's another thing, a hallmark of autism that I learned is the sensory issues,
Mm.
sensory sensitivities, whether it's to sound or light or you know touch,
But that
just
didn't happen
various
until
things.
recently. I didn't need to. I used to be able to go out in the world and, you know, listen to screaming kids in a supermarket and just be like, oh, well, I hope that kid all right. Now I listen to that kid and
Interesting.
it's just like, I need to leave the shopping center, you know. So, but I
Yeah,
have this one and it's bearable. But it's like, that's what I'm saying. My trauma exacerbated my traits. And it's not like it made me more autistic. It made my traits more exacerbated because
you're
it,
right, more known to you.
yeah.
Do you think
Or
somebody else?
it made me less able to hide them, sort of
Okay,
made, I guess.
so you think before
I
you
don't
were
know. I
much.
have it's only really that I've really come to terms with talking about it with my therapist. So because it's only really that it's been, my trauma was about 2 years. I left the trauma about 2 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and it's been only really been in the last few 4 or 5 sessions that I've been able to talk about it, because it's been too much to talk about. I talk about everything else, talk
Right.
around the trauma. So, and it's funny because I can joke about it till the cows come home. Really dark jokes,
Right.
really dark. Like, and my friends, my friends know me and my dark jokes, and even they're going, "Whoa, Kristy, calm down." I'm like, "What? Not allowed."
It's easier to talk about it that way, right? Than
Yeah,
to
but
deal with it
get me
as a
into
serious
therapy, and I'm
subject.
like, "Get me into therapy and talk about it." I'm like, "No." And my therapist is finally, and I finally have a real therapy session, and my therapist is like, "Wow, you're finally actually really talking about stuff." And I'm like, "Hmm, well, it takes 2 years."
Yeah, gotta unpack it slowly sometimes, and that
But
happens.
but a lot of that is because, you know, sometimes it's a disconnect between mind and mouth, and also trauma comes out in a lot of different ways, and
Yeah.
um it's taken me a long time to realize that harm minimization wasn't for me.
Hmm.
I thought I was doing harm minimization excellently, and I probably was, but
Up
you
until a
know,
point,
up to a point, you know.
right?
Now
And
I
then
recognize that I need to do full flat out detox again,
yeah.
and then nothing for a while at least, until
Hmm.
I get myself back on an even keel,
Hmm.
because I've been on stormy waters for a while.
Right, right.
you
No,
know
it's understandably.
so and that's something that therapy is really important. I recommend, even if you don't feel like there's anything major going on in your life, I recommend therapy and DBT and acceptance commitment therapy. They've been stuff that's been really helpful for me as someone who has trauma,
Hmm.
um, and also CPTSD,
Hmm.
because the mindfulness aspect and recognizing that coming back to my body and away from the traumas is something that's, you know you, you recognize that, because CPTSD is closely related to autism in a lot of ways, and that's, you feel the trauma
Lot of overlap.
inside yourself,
Hmm.
and you feel it inside yourself, and when I'm feeling my nerves, when I'm all touched out or too many noises at the shopping center, I feel that with inside myself. So I use DBT. So
Hmm.
that's where it's closely related. It's interconnected.
Hmm.
So it really, really works well. So I recommend it to anybody out there if you can.
If you suspect that you have any sort of trauma that you need to work through, I highly encourage you, when you're looking for a counselor, to see that they have a trauma therapy background, because that specialization, there are just a certain skill set that they can bring to the therapy sessions that somebody who does not is just not quite going to understand. Um,
Yeah. And if you don't like your therapist, don't feel bad for getting another one.
no, it's just like meeting people and making friends, right? Some people you're going to connect with, and some people you aren't. And it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
that other person is a bad person, or negative at all. It's just you didn't quite connect with them. And you have to be able to connect with your therapist in order to feel comfortable of, delving into all this stuff and unpacking it. So yeah, if it takes you 5 therapists before you find like the one that works for you, keep looking. Don't give up on the idea of therapy just because you haven't found that one that you've connected with. No, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. And what I did before I found my therapist is actually research what modalities and what traumas and all that stuff they specialize in, what they specialize in. So I
Yes.
wasn't just going in blind. So it was like CPTSD, autism, and all that sort of stuff.
Right. What do they
So
specialize in? And then I encourage people, a lot of times we try a therapist out, and you have a therapy session, right? That's your first time meeting
yeah,
them. And I encourage you, set up a consultation appointment. It can be, a 15-minute, just, I want to talk to you about your background. I want to talk to you, meaning the therapist. I want to talk to you about what you believe. How do you approach somebody with trauma? And see what they have to say to you, and do that before you actually have a first official therapy session. It's an
mm,
interview. get to know
Yeah, they
them
work for you. They work for you. So
100%, and they need to be
so
able to connect with you on the level that you are, and that you need. See no evil, thanks for dropping by. I'm glad that you stopped in, even if it's just for a little bit. Support us. I appreciate it. I saw Noise Opera was here too, so that is just awesome. One of the other things that I heard mentioned, and this is interesting that we had talked about, but a hallmark of autism is difficulty intuitively reading neurotypical social signs. And this was something that you had said did not seem to be an issue for you.
well, I can read people very well. So I can walk into a room and I can know how people are, but I don't know whether that's got to do with my autism or because I've lived in a place of trauma my whole life. And
And
it's
you're
not
very
that
studied.
I'm very, yeah, well read, but it's also that comes from, when you're hypersensitive, you pick
Mm-hmm.
up on people's emotions and, you walk in and you can tell when someone's upset with you. So that's picking up on someone's emotions very, very
Mm-hmm.
well. And and people say that people with autism can't pick up on people's emotions, and that's very untrue. And that's untrue of most people with autism, I would say. We're very empathetic, and they're finding out that that's very true of many people with autism. It's just that just because we don't show them in the same way you do doesn't mean that we don't have them. And we may not show them in the same way you do. So that's where we're not communicating in the same way. So
So the
when
social.
when when I'm or just like when I'm just when I'm incredibly happy,
Mm-hmm.
it may come out in me sobbing. I may just sob and sob, but I'm actually happy. I just
Mm-hmm.
can't express it in happiness. So it may look to you that I'm incredibly upset, but I'm just so happy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I just can't express my happiness to you in that moment. So it's going to look to you that you've done something for me that is so incredibly kind, but I'm going to look really, really upset about it.
But
So
just knowing
it's
that
going to
those
look,
are happy tears.
yeah, but unless you know me, it's going to look like
Mm-hmm.
you've really upset me, and it's going to look like I don't know how to deal with what you've just done. But just give me a moment, and I'll settle myself down, and I'll deal with it appropriately. So that's when the communication breaks down, and you just have to let us get ourselves together, and but that's when it breaks down with people with nonverbal skills the most, is that they can't then tell you that they're actually happy because they're so overwhelmed with emotion that it comes out in different ways. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's when this is actually why I'm agreed to do it, because I want to talk about other things, is that you know it's about communication. That's what breaks down in a lot of things, is that communication is broken down in a lot of ways. And 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 that's where I feel like I break down in a lot of ways too, is my communication isn't there, but I
Mm-hmm.
have all the empathy in the world and I can understand you very, very well, but I can't always communicate what I mean. So the opposite of what I want to say comes out of my mouth. So sometimes I'll say no when I actually mean yes. Just give me
Okay.
a moment and I'll fix it up, or correct me. Just say, what did you mean? And I'll be like, what
Right.
do you mean I mean? I'll be like, oh, hang on, no, I meant no. Oh, hang on, no, I meant yes. Oh, no, this is really confusing. Ah. So,
So
that's
it's more the ability to communicate appropriately within a social situation that
they're
is
not actually understanding the what's going on itself. It's the communication that's broken down, then not
right.
understanding
Okay.
what's going on. Yeah. So, but that's something that's been looked into more now than it has been before, because they're only just understanding that's what's going on, because we're only us now, as the people with autism ourselves, are only just understanding that ourselves and being able to express it ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and being heard.
Yeah. Now, the fourth thing that I found as uh, one of the, the hallmarks of autism, just having autism, is this special interest, being able to, have one or two things that you hyper focus on and are just, and it may seem so strange to the outside world that this is what you're interested in, but you could spend hours and hours and hours just into it, and you could think 3 minutes have gone by. Is that something that you found?
Yeah, mine was politics for a very long time.
Oh,
But
wow, that's interesting.
yeah, since I was a child, I wanted to be a politician. And what
Oh,
broke me out of that was seeing how women in politics were treated. And then
mm,
I had to like wipe that out. And that was a very recent decision. And then and also well, and also cosmetology, like
uh-huh.
not like the stars. That's another one.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
I have a lot of hyper focuses because I think a lot of times, and I'm going from
Okay.
one thing to the other. So I have a
Mm-hmm,
lot of things I focus on. I'm also into psychology.
mm-hmm.
Um, but they're the three main things that I was focused on, and now I'm into um, ending domestic violence. So that's my big life goal.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And that's
and
something that
also
I want to
raising the
have
voices.
you, yeah, I want to have you back on again to talk about that, and to talk about that effort that you're doing, and the
Not
things that
astrology,
the things that you're doing.
astronomy.
Astronomy. Yeah, the stars.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, the cosmos, cosmology, not
cosmos.
cosmetology, not the beauty
Yeah,
of the stars. The difference
yeah,
between the two.
I words wrong. Yeah,
No, 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 no. They're so similar. Believe me, I'll get them wrong sometimes too. Hi, Maureen. Hi,
feels like
Mayonnaise.
makeup.
It'll be makeup too, whatever. How are you guys doing? Thanks for dropping in tonight. I am so glad that you are, so glad that you're joining us for this conversation. So I want to put up, now that we've kind of talked about some basics, I'm going to add here this screen, and I wish I could make this bigger. Wonder if I could, nope, that doesn't work. So we're going to have to
Just
go with this.
while you're doing that, I find everything interesting, so I can go a rabbit hole of into anything. So,
So,
but yeah. I also at the moment I'm also looking into astrology, but for a while there it was only astronomy. But there's a reason why my name is Cosmic and it's not for naught. Haha,
yeah,
ching.
exactly, exactly. So if you
That's a
guys can
bit of a
see,
bit
and
of a pun
maybe I'll
there.
put a link to a chart or a bigger chart, but I'm looking at this on my screen so that I can see it better. But on the left-hand side, you'll see the trauma related in pink. And these are all the things that they're saying is, trauma related. We talked about nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive memories, shattered trust, um, sense of self disrupted. But I found that more as a crossover. But the hypervigilance, the avoidance behavior, all related to some sort of traumatic event. Um, then we've got these symptoms for the autism spectrum. Then we've got all of this stuff that is overlapping, and it's a pretty big area. And as I was talking to you, I was mentioning that as I was looking through this, that I came across at least 12 that were overlapping. And, I'm sure other places might have more or less, just kind of based on the way that they've worded them or grouped them together. But
Yeah, and
going
it can
down,
become overwhelming. Just thinking,
yeah.
oh my God.
Well, and then to think about somebody who has trauma and autism, and we're going to talk a little bit later about, how does uh, how having autism puts you more at risk for having these traumas. But one of them that's an overlap, and again, if you don't have both, we're just going to talk about an overlap, meaning a similarity between the two, and then we'll we can kind of talk about what it means to have both. But the reason behind why you have these traits, all of this stuff in orange, it's going to either relate to your autism or it's going to relate to your trauma for some particular reason. So it's the why behind it that gives you the clue as to which category you might fall into. Again, not saying, not for the people who have both. We're just talking about them as separate entities. But one of them is dissociation, right? And so with trauma, we know that people can dissociate, whether it's for long periods of time or whether it's shorter periods of time, in trying to separate themselves from the trauma, from that traumatic memory. Where does that dissociation come in regards to autism?
Well,
Is it the thoughts that
well,
you're so
for
involved
me,
in your head that you're not quite present?
I think it was for me, I've got my old school reports, and a lot of them say that she daydreams a lot. So I was off with the fairies all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I was just a daydreamer. I
Just
was
a lot of
always
thoughts
off.
going through your head, and
I was always in my mind a lot because, you know, and but I don't think it was because I can't. I don't think it was. I was always reading, always in books. I
mm-hmm.
preferred books to real life, but now, since the traumas, like since the big traumas, when the disassociation has been bad, like I forget how to park sometimes.
Mm.
um, and that's um, and that's when when I forget how to do things, or you know, that's that's or when I just stand there and I'm just like I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I'm
Just
like, whoa, that's
to-
different. I'm not lost in my head. I'm lost in the world. Like I don't know where I am in the world.
mm-hmm.
So that's different. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not daydreaming. So
Just
it's
a
different. It's,
total disconnect between your thoughts and what's going on or
yeah.
what you thought you were going to be doing.
Yeah, I'd much rather daydream.
Yeah.
No.
Um, one of the
Daydream.
daydream believer. One of the
Yeah.
other things that they talked about, there's this, a similar symptom is intimacy issues, and makes perfect sense for me from a trauma issue that depending on what your trauma was, whether it was physical or whether it was sexual. um,
I have boundary issues.
yeah, knowing
Whereas I don't know, like, and like
trust
you'd think,
issues.
well, yeah, but see, I'm so open that I'm like, give me all the love. Like, and I'm all about the give me love, give me hugs, give me all the stuff. I'm like, I should have been a 60s child,
Oh, me too.
you know.
100%. Yeah, I am my mother's child
So
that way. We're
and
both hippies
so
at heart.
that might have been why I wouldn't have been recognized as a autistic person, because I don't like being touched. I don't like being touched. Like, don't touch me, but give me hugs. So,
Interesting. So the sensory issues, it's not as highlighted for you.
oh no, it is. It's just touch me when I want them. You
Okay,
know. Yeah.
right.
So I give me hugs, but don't come up and touch me.
Okay.
Cause yeah. So don't touch me when I'm not ready. Like people
Yeah.
who touch me
Okay.
on the shoulder, I'll be
Uh-huh.
jumping all over the place. Like I'm like I'm like a jumping bean. Like I'm always ready
Hmm.
to jump. But
Yeah.
if I'm aware and someone wants to hug me, I'm ready for it. I'll hug anybody. I could stand there with a free hug thing and hug anybody all day. But if someone came up behind me, I'd have to stand up against a wall,
Hmm.
so someone couldn't come up behind me and hug me. But I could do that free hug thing, and that sounds incongruous to autism and someone would see PTSD, but that's because I am offering the hugs. No
Right.
one's
And
trying to,
you're aware, you're
no
present
one's, yeah, no
in
one's
that
trying to
touch.
take them from me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So just touching on it was the intimacy issues with just straight autism. It made sense when it was being explained, from a sensory standpoint. There's, all
Yeah, well,
sorts
see,
of
I don't,
inputs
this is where
that.
I don't understand it because I don't, it's not a thing that I have.
Mhm.
So this is where someone else who has a difficulty with intimacy would be a better person to talk to than me because I don't have it. In fact, I
And
have the opposite. I have too
see,
many intimacy.
and this is what we're going to talk about as we're going through these things. Just because these are traits that overlap doesn't mean you as a person are going to have all of these. So,
Exactly.
everything within this circle, this pink circle, are common traits of CPTSD. Does it mean that because you don't have every single one of them, you don't have CPTSD? Absolutely not, because we are all
Yeah.
individuals and our traumas are our own and our own experiences, and where how
But
we got the
actually,
trauma and
but
what our
my
support system was like and all of that kind of stuff.
but my version of sexuality is actually is actually a trait of CPTSD as well.
Hmm.
Heightened sexuality.
Absolutely, 100%. I was there with you. Absolutely. um
Yeah.
Hey, Brazy, how are you doing? Oh, got another natural hugger in here. Hey, Sven, thanks for
I hug
joining us.
trees. And even then I'm like, hey tree, am I right if I hug you?
Hey, this was something that you always hear the phrase tree hugger, but that it actually is very grounding
Yeah, but
to,
they feel nice. Just after they've given off their bark, you're like, oh, you're so smooth, hug. Oh,
oh,
oh, sorry, I hope that was okay.
that is very,
Yeah,
yeah, when that bark peels back and you just have that 100% smooth wood
yeah,
surface. Yeah, I do like the feel of that as well. Um,
that's the sensory thing too.
Definitely, definitely. So something else that's very common with both is a heightened risk of victimization. And just
Hmm.
from a vulnerability standpoint, it is something that both people with PTSD and anyone in the autism spectrum have in common. And this is real easy to see as to why it would be, right? With
Hmm.
CPTSD, having that past trauma, we're generally more vulnerable and we've got more issues. And so we're just better targets. And
I'd actually like to work out statistically how much more likely you are to be a victim if you've got both autism and
oh,
CPTSD, because I know if you have a disability, you're 50% more likely to be a victim of domestic violence. That's in Australia, at least. I'm not sure what it is worldwide. Um, I haven't got that far down yet because right now my project is based in Australia. Um, but it's just like, and that's only for women. I haven't, because I go in there into the police stations and you only see it for women, and it's just like it's scary to think that just because you have a disability, you are therefore more likely to be a victim of family or domestic violence.
the and I don't know, I think this was just US, but and it varied depending on the researcher that you were looking at, but it was 30 to 60% more likely to be victimized if you had trauma and CPTSD.
Wow.
Those are it's not a small portion that we're talking
Yeah.
about, right?
And
And
it's just like, and you just think, and if you just think, if you've got so many things, it's just like you're almost guaranteed to be a victim.
yeah,
And there are certain people out there, like certain narcissistic, like especially like a malignant narcissist, they
hmm,
walk around and all they do is spot victims.
yeah, yeah. It's just like the groomers, they're very good at being able to pick out which person is going to be, a better victim than somebody else. And so
Yeah,
they're
it was
looking for all those traits, somebody who's more socially isolated, somebody who has lower self-esteem. And, when you've been a victim of trauma at a young age, these are hallmarks of us, right? And so it's,
it was
the
my father is a
re-victimization rate
perfect
is
one of
just,
them. It's like I don't know how he's managed to make a victim of every partner he's ever had, but yet he has. And here I
mhm,
was telling everybody how awful he was, and nobody listened.
yeah,
And it's not their fault. It's not
mhm,
their fault they didn't listen. It's not my fault they didn't listen either.
no,
But it's just like, but now that he's finally been, charged and he didn't do time, but it's just like he finally he's had some sort of court justice.
right.
It's like, well,
Accountability for what he's done.
accountability. Yeah, I couldn't find the word. It's
No,
just
it's
like,
fine.
well, it was many years and many women who could have been saved of going through anything.
Yeah.
But he still would have gone out there and changed his name and done something, because that sort of person is going to do that unless they're put away from everybody.
Right. It's just who they are. It's who
Yeah,
they, what they do. It's like, I just think it's encoded in their DNA, and this is how they act.
yeah. Well, I was talking to a very dear friend of mine last night, and she was just saying, because I was saying that where I see, if for me, I can't help it. If I see, if for me, if there is air, there is hope. I have hope
Hmm.
for my mother, and I don't know if that's just me being foolish, but because I think she's a great person. She's also a terrible person. Two things can be true at once. She's
Everybody
done.
has the ability to change.
Yeah,
I don't
she's
I
just
don't
got
think
to
it's foolish to have hope. It's just
she's
whether
just got
somebody
to want to
latches onto
change.
that. Yeah,
She's just got
absolutely.
to want to change.
Yeah.
I don't hold out too much hope for my father, but I still have some hope there. But that's just
Hmm.
who I am as a person. I'm just full of hope and love and kindness and
Hmm.
blah 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 blah. That's who I am. It's just in my
Hmm.
nature. But even if he does change, and even if my mother does change, whatever, I can't words. I don't want them at my table ever again. They can
Yes.
change. They can change over there and be good people over there, because they've hurt me too
Hmm.
much.
Right,
So
exactly, exactly. And it's, that is definitely something that I think that we learn, and that I've learned as a trauma survivor, is just because somebody is sorry for something, it doesn't mean you have to accept them, back into your life.
yeah,
They can go on and be a great person with a lot of other people, but
yeah.
this is my boundary. There's just too
I
much
hope
between there.
the people I hope they change for are my siblings, not for
Mhm.
me. Because I love my siblings, and that's it's not for me. I hope they change for, because I'm done.
Yeah,
I've got
exactly.
I want the rest of. I've had enough trauma from my parents, and they've done enough to me, and I've moved on, and they're part of the reason why my trauma was created. They're part of
Hmm.
why I am this person. They created this person. They created me. They
Hmm.
created my trauma.
Right. You were born with the autism, and then your environment and your experiences,
Yeah,
growing up, then added the trauma onto that. And
yeah. So
so, so some of the other things I just want to quickly mention, and we can talk about a few of them in depth, but um, one of them is, sleep issues, very common with both people with autism and past trauma. Um, Impulse control difficulties. This is something that both have in common as well.
yep.
And the hypervigilance, we already spoke about that. It just kind of is depending on how heightened your vigilance is and why it's hypervigilant. What are you, is it because of it's your baseline and that's just, who you are because of the autism? Or is it based on your trauma? And so you're always looking for the next danger signals. Um, and another one of them, and for obvious reasons, negative belief system. you know. Um, this is something that I think gets hammered into us. Anyone with CPTSD can relate to this, whether it's through abuse or whether
And
it's
also
because of
also
neglect.
with what people with autism can have a negative belief system drummed into them too. You know, why are you acting this way? Why are you so weird? Just
Hmm.
be normal. You know.
Exactly. Exactly. And I looked at it also from a parenting aspect. If somebody doesn't understand that their child is autistic, they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand that this is just the way they are. If they're narcissistic or if they have mental issues that they themselves are dealing with, so they're just not a great parent in general, and you add all those things, any one of those things would definitely be, enough to be reinforcing a negative belief system in the child, as to instead of being helpful to the child, right? And
Mm.
when did we really start recognizing autism and looking at it as something other than the kid's just different, or the kids, or thinking, of it as, well, they obviously just aren't smart. They're just not intellectually there. They're, it's
Well, I
what,
didn't
the
pick up.
past
I didn't
10,
pick.
20
I
years.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on a lot of the things that my daughter was doing because they were just the things that I were doing. Like she didn't want to interact with a lot of kids her age. She didn't want to do a lot of things. I was like, well, I'm not going to force her because I was forced when I was a kid and it made me very unhappy. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to try and make my kid unhappy. She's very unhappy anyway. So she was just like me, I figured.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out she was just like me, same, but different. Um, so I didn't recognize in her I, what other people saw in me, which was autism. And that happens a lot in people who have autism, and mothers with autism and fathers with autism and people who have the same diagnosis as their children,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't see an issue because it's just the same. They're
Right.
just the same, and that's something that happens. And you know and that's something that happens with a lot with mothers and daughters with autism. They don't see it, and they're actually seeing it a lot more now because of, sorry, my nose has just got itchy,
That's
because of
right.
TikTok and Facebook and all these lists and all these things. I think these lists are a little bit damaging because it's putting people into too many categories, but they're also helpful. But I think people need to look further than the lists. um yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you can be this, that, and the other thing all at the same time or on different
Yeah.
days, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there are days where I feel with it and I feel like I can operate in society just fine. And there are days when I want nothing more to just read my book and stay on my couch or my reading chair and pretend like the rest of the world doesn't exist. And it's difficult for me to interact with the rest of the world and get anything done other than taking care of my basic needs, meaning that I get water. It's just like that's, I very much was a book person. That was my escape when I was a kid as well, from
Yeah.
all the trauma and everything that I did. So, um,
Well, actually, this is something that I wanted to make a point of, is that a lot of the people in the community don't use high functioning anymore, or because some days I can be high functioning or thought of as I look high functioning, but
mhm,
my actual label that I've been given, my diagnosis, wouldn't have been thought of as high functioning because of the level of supports that I need. I have
mhm,
support workers. I have a carer. So I have a support worker coming in today. I have a support worker coming in tomorrow. My functional capacity report, if you read it, you would cry, because you would see just like the one from last year and the one that I had this year, to see the level of trauma and just how far down I've
mhm.
gone from trauma I've suffered is devastating. Like, I can't read it. I've read it. I skim it just because I
Right.
need to see what supports I need.
Right.
But I read it, I compartmentalize, and I read it as if it's a different person, as if I'm
Yeah.
looking for supports for a different person, because it's that used to be what I used to do.
Hmm.
But it's difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
Internalizing all of that and going, oh, this is me, just can be extremely overwhelming.
yeah, but so, but on some days I can be a high functioning. Right now, I appear high functioning even though I'm stimming. But on other days, I've completely shut down like a TV, and I couldn't move, I couldn't
Hmm.
walk, I couldn't talk. So I'm thought of as non-functioning, non-verbal,
Now,
and that's what it's like being someone with autism, and it's incredibly disabling, and it's not a superpower. And but do you know what's also great is that you're allowed to label yourself as whatever you want. So if you want to label yourself as high functioning, you're allowed. If you want to label yourself as a cat, go for it. But um, it's actually quite triggering for me for the term high functioning,
Mm.
because for people to call me, oh, you're a high functioning autistic. um, well, no, I'm not. um,
I want to ask, do
because
you think that the ability to mask is, somebody who masks very well then
oh
can
yeah, I'm
be
very good at that.
thought of as high
High functioning.
functioning because they're appearing to fit into society. They're appearing to do all the quote unquote, normal interactions or
Yeah,
whatever.
I guess that's what I did very well up until my traumas became too much for my
Hmm.
masks to bear.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, but that's what I wanted. That's just something that it's because it's something that um, that's something that my family really struggled with more than I did. Is that they were like, you're they actually think I'm not autistic and that I'm putting it on, and I'm thinking that I don't know how I could fool
Right.
doctors,
And
governments.
support care workers on a daily basis.
I don't know how I
That,
could be
yeah.
so consistently a liar for
Yeah.
them to. And it's just like, I don't know if they're trying to be cruel or they're trying to disable me more by making me think, am I putting this on? Am I putting this on? Is this an act? I don't know. Because then I'm like, then
Then
I
you're
think,
second
well,
guessing
maybe.
yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Going,
just like and that happens a lot. It happens to almost everyone who's late diagnosed, is that it's their family and their friends, the people close by them who don't accept the diagnosis.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate because you would think that they would be the first people to go, oh, that's why you've been that way since birth.
Oh,
That's why you've done this. That's why you've done that. Because as I was
some
researching
not
this,
not all. They're not all. Some of their family. So I'm just gonna have a quick sip of coffee because yeah,
no, go ahead, go ahead. Um, I'm
I
gonna
choked
just
on it before.
mention, no, go ahead. I'm just going to mention some of the other things that are crossovers between CPTSD and the autism spectrum. And there are things like executive functioning issues. Stimming is very common for both. Also, uh, high rates of substance abuse, depression, and also self wounding, which negative coping skills makes perfect sense in regards to the um, difficulties that we're trying to overcome. If you don't have a support system, if you're not getting help, we self medicate in some sort of way, whether it's self soothing, and sometimes we don't choose the best avenues, the best ways of going about that. I want to pivot just a little bit to talking about, trauma and autism and having the two and having the overlap. And one of the some of the reasons that they have looked at and said that it's, I won't say quite common, but more common for people with autism to have CPTSD is because of social situations that are in general more difficult to navigate, parenting issues, lack of understanding that we were just talking about, um, having to navigate a neurotypical world, bullying, fitting in, all the things that come with um, the social issues of just growing up, and then having autism on top of that is just kind of exacerbated. And one of the things that I found rather interesting that we were talking about earlier is that something that might be a mild stressor for a neurotypical person or even a person with PTSD, if you have autism, that stressor may be so significant that it's actually traumatic. So it's easier to actually develop or acquire trauma when you have autism because of this. Uh, so they're doing research into this now, trying to look at the percentages showing the increased percentages of trauma. And one of the reasons, when you look statistically at the research, they actually are very low percentages of people who are diagnosed with both CPTSD or PTSD and autism. And one of the reasons that they're looking at this and saying, why, when we know that it's so easy to have both, why statistically do we have such low numbers of people officially diagnosed with both? And one of the major reasons that they're thinking is because of the way that the DSM defines PTSD. And if you don't know, CPTSD is not even in our DSM. It is in the international version, but we're hoping that with the next, I think it's the DSM-6 that will come out, that it will be included in that. But because of the way that it's written, people aren't falling under it. So
Actually, my therapist is saying that they're also going to try and put borderline personality under the umbrella of CPTSD because it's all
there's so
because
much crossover.
yeah, I mean it's also because it's borderline is also a created thing and it's all created by trauma. And once people are told they got borderline and they go to some therapists are like, well, that's untreatable, when it's very treatable. They've got lots of
Right.
modalities of stuff they're looking into now that they're finding it's very treatable as long as the person is willing to go for treatment. So and that's another thing. That's another thing that where men, just like women, have not been looked into with autism for until the last 20 years or so, since the 2000s. Men haven't been looked into with borderline personality disorder. They've been thought, no, they can't have that. So it's very interesting, the overlap and the different in autism and BPD as well. There's a graphic that I was actually looking for until I got distracted last night that I have on my computer with all 5 of these things.
Yes. I
Where
think I know what you're talking about. I remember seeing one with BPD, CPTSD, and ADHD, and the
yeah,
overlap with all of those. And Dr. Amani, who is a very popular YouTuber, and she does a lot of work with narcissists, but I was listening to a podcast that she did in regards to BPD and trauma and the distinctions between the two. But on some of them, they were like such hairline distinctions. She's like, the therapist really needs to know what they're talking about. They need to understand what causes BPD versus, just having CPTSD, and where the differences are. And sometimes it can be just something as basic as where the person is coming from, where their worldview is in regards to something. And
Yeah.
it's so it can be very, very muddy and
Yeah. Well, see,
extremely important.
it also depends on where the therapist is coming from as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was just going to say. So it's extremely important that if you're somebody who thinks that they have or has been diagnosed with that you have a therapist that you're working with who understands the ins and outs of it and understands
Very
how
trauma
to treat
informed.
it. Yes, and then understands how to treat it. And one of the things that I was looking at in terms of treatments is because there is all this overlap between autism and CPTSD and trauma related things. A lot of the trauma treatments, this is why they can work well for people with autism. However, they're not always going to work. Sometimes they can actually be triggering for somebody.
Yeah, well, see,
And
there's one treatment that I found that worked really well for my daughter because she's not nonverbal. She's very verbal with me when she was talking to me. We're
mhm,
non-contact at the moment, which I'm open about because I feel like it's good to be open about these sort of things.
mhm,
Um, when she was contact with me, she talked to me all the time. We'd talk in the car and she'd be like, "What?" I'd be like, "Whoa, why can't you be like this with your therapist that we're about to go to right now?" And then to get to a therapist, and it was like she was nonverbal because she'd shut up. She'd be like a clam. She wouldn't open up.
yeah,
But that was fine because she'd tell. I'd ask her what she wanted me to tell the therapist. And I'd be like, "Okay, this is what she wanted you to know." But I can't remember where I was going with that. Where did I start off?
uh, she was verbal with you, but
Yeah. So it's like it's like a way of I can't really remember where I was going, but it it's not it's not selective verbalism at all. It's like you don't choose to be verbal.
mhm,
It's like you just can't talk to
mhm,
those that sometimes you really want to talk, but you
mhm,
just can't,
yeah,
and sometimes I get that too, like, sometimes the words really want to come out, but they just won't express. Like right now, I've got a block in my brain because there's something that I really wanted to say, but
mhm.
it's not there. And later on, it's going to be like,
Boom. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Real quick, it's interesting. Crystal is saying here that and she's in Canada, so I don't know if this
yeah.
is going to be something that the
Oh,
DSM
I know
being
what
the
I was going to
United
say.
States,
Write it down.
that they want to change borderline personality disorder and CPTSD to be called developmental trauma. Uh, so that's really interesting. And I'd be curious as to whether that's something that they are looking at in the United States as well, or whether this is just something that's more international. Or
I figured
just,
out what I was going to say.
yeah,
The modality that worked out for my daughter was EMDR. It's eye
yes,
movement because she didn't actually have to talk about what she'd gone through with her
right.
therapist. Her therapist could just say, "Think about what you want to talk about. I'm going to do these eye movement things."
Yeah.
I didn't actually have to be in the therapy sessions to translate
Mm-hmm.
Angel's things. So,
Right.
and then, it was like she could talk about anything that about me, like, if I was upsetting her, I didn't actually
Mm-hmm.
have to translate how I was upsetting her. So she actually could be comfortable for once talking to a
Right.
therapist about how I was affecting her life. And I was like, oh God, that's a relief.
Yeah,
Because for once,
EMDR is something that has really come out with the trauma community as well. It's something that's they found very effective
yeah.
for
But it was something
PTSD.
But that's why I wanted to, why I was talking about how, you know, she's not selectively nonverbal. So this is a way
Mhm.
that she could talk to a therapist without having to talk to a therapist, you know, and,
Yeah. So this is something
you
that
know,
works for people with autism as well.
yeah. So it's a way of communicating without actually communicating. So you just have to figure out ways that work for you. And, you know, not
Yeah.
everything is going to work for everybody. And, but also it's a very, it's a very triggering therapy. So you
Mhm.
have to be very gentle to yourself afterwards. And my well, it was my daughter's therapist was available to her for 24 hours at any moment.
Oh,
She could text her
wow.
for 24 hours after the therapy sessions, just in case something came up for my daughter.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. Yeah, and that's,
yeah,
something that's totally critical is that not everything is going to work for everybody. We are all individuals. And as we're speaking of these, it's just like we said with the crossover between CPTSD and autism, not everybody who's going to have each and every, not everyone's going to have all of these. You can have this and that, and it doesn't mean you don't have that condition. Um, Same with, treatment options. Not everything is going to work for you. But if you do want to consider EMDR, definitely make sure that you have a therapist who is very well versed, who has gone through specific training for EMDR. Not somebody who's just like, oh, yeah, I read about it. Let's try it. So I think that's very interesting that the aftercare, and I think that's something that's been coming a long way now within um, trauma therapy, is therapists being available after the therapy session. I mean, I remember going to therapy and it was like, oh, you went once a week, or you went once every other week, and it was like, if you have anything you want to talk about, just write it down. But you're right. At those hours after your therapy session, once you've had a chance to, if you've dealt with anything, significant, and you've had a chance to process it, that may be the time, 6 hours later, when you need to have that input from your therapist the most. And I think it's wonderful that's coming about. And I know that that's an extra step, right, of availability for therapists. And as we talk about the financial cost of therapy, and being able to afford therapy, if you're doing something private, for them to then be available 24 hours after, it's just another increased cost. So, and it obviously, with that, depends on where you are in the world and what your healthcare system is
I
like.
was just
I
about
can
to say
only
that we're
only
very
speak from
lucky
the
that
US.
we benefited from that. We get 10 free sessions of therapy a year, and my daughter benefited from the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and that she
Okay.
benefited from that. And also, I benefited from that too, in that I got autism training, which is one of the reasons why I feel like I am. I'm not an expert in any
Hmm.
way, and I'm thinking about my experience from myself. Um, so and I can only talk from my own experience, but I did have autism training with an expert in autism, um, who had, you know, specific training and with the amygdala and why you have meltdowns and why children with autism act out in certain ways, and a whole bunch of different stuff. And I did that for my daughter. So and I
So
did
was that
that.
before you got your diagnosis?
Yeah.
That's so
So
interesting.
she also told me that I was autistic and I should probably have um, stuff, but that was in the process, and you know, and yeah, she said that she's never met an autistic person like me, and I says, but isn't that the way autism goes?
Yeah, we're all right. You're all individual. Well, we're all individual people, right? And things are
Yeah,
going to
I'm an
affect us
individual. You
differently.
can't beat that. Yeah.
And that's why when we talked about, the hallmarks, all the stuff in orange on the far right, and the stuff in pink on the far left, we're just talking about hallmarks, and it's not going to be each and every one of us, or to the same degree. Um, and it's so critical that everybody addresses their own issues uniquely, right? We can't be put in boxes, and we don't need to be. And normal is just a mean of, meaning the average, of taking a
It's the golden
conglomerate of
mean.
people. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, but if we don't want everybody to fit into that, right? It'd be boring. That's why
Yeah.
people are people. So,
Yeah.
Kristy, this has been an absolute wonderful conversation. There's so much more that we could talk about in regards to this, and I hope to definitely have you on again, and we'll speak some more about trauma and
This is a
autism.
hyper
And
focus of mine now. I really, really would like to bring about awareness of how people with autism are just the same as everybody else. We just may not communicate the same way as everybody else, but we'd really like to.
I think that is a perfect takeaway in regards to speaking to autism directly, because, as I said, I don't have experience with it. I don't have anybody in the family with it. So it was a very interesting research jaunt that I went on to kind of just do a crash course in it, and learning about all these similarities between CPTSD or PTSD. Um, I could see how some of what I have experienced looking at someone with autism and saying, you're not so different than me. Look at all of these things that we really actually have in common. And it just brings it down to the basis of, no matter what we have, we're all people. We're all going through our own struggles, whether we have mental conditions or not. We all go through struggles in life, right? And so just take each and every person who you meet as that person, and don't allow some sort of diagnoses to color the way that you might think of that person or interact with that person.
I am a person with autism. I am not autism.
There you go. There you go. Exactly. Chat, I have to say thank you so much for being here. Davey, Adrian is here, Misha, some people who came in after Bobo, came in after I was talking. I am sorry that I didn't get to interact with the chat quite as much. This is just a huge topic that we're just scratching the surface with. So this is just really an introductory video on this, and we will definitely be touching on some of these topics in the future, as well as I look forward to having Kristy back to talk about her efforts with domestic violence awareness with men as being the survivors. And a very important topic, and something that does not get nearly enough the recognition, the same as we talk about the sexual assault male survivors as well. I think that it's high time that we recognize that everybody in society can suffer from mental conditions. Everybody in society can suffer from sexual or domestic violence. It doesn't discriminate, you know? So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. We've had a little bit of coordination with our time differences, but we got it worked out, and I definitely look forward to having you on again. And if you guys have any further comments, please drop them in the comments afterwards. Not only helps the algorithm, but it also helps me know a little bit more about what you thought about this. Where would you like to see this go? Is there other pieces of the puzzle you think we missed and that we need to address in the future? Let us know in the comments section. And
I can talk about this all day, and I have lots of resources.
Exactly.
And if
This does not need to be a one and done.
but if anyone really wants to look up something interesting, look up the Telepathy Tapes podcast. It's on Spotify. and Apple, and I'm in no way associated with it. I just find it really, really interesting, and I would really like to talk about it with somebody else.
That would be fabulous. Yeah, I very briefly got a chance to kind of look at it, and but I needed my crash course in autism. I will say I will put out a shout out. Body illusion. I missed a shout out to you. Hey, how you doing? There is a book called Neurotribes that Dr. Kim really recommends, and I was looking at it, and it does look like an excellent book, an excellent resource for anyone with who is part of the neurodiversity, crowd. I don't have them right now, but I'm going to put some links to some research that I found and also to the book and a few other things. I'll drop them in the video description after we get done with the chat. So you can look for those. All right, I think that's it. Hey, if you have not hit the like button, please do before you leave this stream. I would really appreciate it. And share this with anybody who think might be interested in it. That kind of helps get the word out, not only about the channel, but about the different topics that we cover. And if you enjoyed our new intro, thank you, Misha. I said it at the very beginning, but I want to say it again. Appreciate all the edits that you did do with that, and absolutely love it. Rick, how you doing? Thanks for dropping by. Oh, people are putting uncooked cookies. Oh gosh, don't even go there. I ate a half-gallon ice cream in the last 3 days. I've had my share of sugar. It's not that good. Stick around. You guys can chat up a little bit if you want for the next few minutes. I'm going to have an outro that I'm going to play. I have to thank our beautiful Jimena for this. She put this together for me as I was thinking about doing various things for an outro. Misha and I were working on an outro, but I love what she's done, but I've decided to take that and turn it into something else. So here is a new outro, and see what you think. Again, drop me a comment. See what you think, if you like it. And with that, I will say again, Kristy, thank you so much. You can find her at Kristy Robinson 1979. That's her channel. And please do check her out. Go over there and subscribe. And guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It has meant a lot to me that you've joined us tonight for this conversation. As always, we will be next on live Saturday, where we will be talking about trauma. Is it different for men and women? Does it affect men and women differently? If so, how? That will be Saturday's topic at 3 p.m. Eastern. Please remember that you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved just the way you are, for who you are. Hugs and love from me, guys. Good night. Surviving together, never alone.
Through the fire, through the rain, we have walked through endless pain, but we stand, we rise again, stronger now, we break the chain, surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. Every tear, every tells the story of who we are. Not just survivors, but warriors too. With love as our armor, we see this through. We see you, we hear you, and we believe in you. Surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. We see you, we hear you,